I call this meeting of the Senate Armed Services Committee meeting to order. And today I welcome our nominees and their families, and I would like to extend my gratitude for their willingness to serve our nation. Chairman Wicker is unable to attend today's hearing, so I will be acting in his stead. At this time, I would like to offer his opening statement into the record. Without objection, it is now entered. I now turn to Ranking Member Reed for his opening remarks. Senator.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Mr. Obadal, Mr. O'Keefe, welcome to you and your families. Gentlemen, I'd like to acknowledge and thank your spouses who have both served as officers in the Army and the Air Force. We appreciate your family's long records of service. You certainly exemplified dedication to nation and to the Constitution. Thank you. Mr. Obadal, you have been nominated to be Undersecretary of the Army. Your long career as an Army aviator and Special Operations Officer should serve you well in this role. If confirmed, one of your top challenges will be helping the Army navigate the perpetual tension between end strength, modernization, and readiness from a budget standpoint. The Army has been working to grow end strength and pursue major modernization efforts for years, but it has faced a multi-year trend series of flat budgets, which appears to be the case again this year. Last week, the Army announced broad initiatives that reduce headquarters, consolidate commands, accelerate emerging technologies, restructure infantry brigades, reduce procurement of certain ground vehicles and aviation systems, and other changes. The details of this plan are so far limited, but I would ask for your thoughts on how to balance these efforts against such budget priorities. Mr. Obadal, I'm also skeptical of the administration's deployment of 12,000 soldiers to the southern border, including elements of the 10th Mountain Division and the expansion of Army installations to include so-called national defense areas along the border. At a time when border crossings are at the lowest level in years, border security is indeed a national security, but immigration enforcement is a mission that must be carried out by the Department of Homeland Security, not the Department of Defense. And in my personal engagement with commanders at all levels, many of them have made clear that border missions have a draining effect on their time, resources, and readiness. Mr. Obadal, I would like to know how you would plan to ensure soldiers' time, training, and capabilities are not needlessly wasted as the Army works hard to meet its existing demands and increasing threats. Ultimately, the Army's success depends on its soldiers and civilians. Over the past 2 years, the Army has made significant progress in improving its recruiting activities and has enjoyed success with programs like the Future Soldier Preparatory Course. However, I am concerned that administration efforts to limit who serves and what roles may have a chilling effect on recruitment and retention. There is room in the Army for all qualified volunteers. I'm interested in your thoughts on this issue also. Mr. O'Keefe, I welcome your nomination to be Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. You're well qualified for this role, having served as a professional staff member on this committee for many years, in addition to your work at the Bipartisan Policy Center and service as an Air Force officer. If confirmed, you will assist the Undersecretary in addressing many challenges for the Department, including, first and foremost, ensuring that our military has adequate numbers of ready and trained service members of sufficiently high character and talent to meet our national defense objectives. You will be responsible for assisting the Undersecretary in military and civilian personnel policy, military family and child care programs, the Defense Department-run school system, and working with the military services to ensure the health and welfare of the force. I would ask that you share what military family issues you believe need to be addressed most and what recommendations you have to improve readiness. Gentlemen, you will both be challenged to handle the fallout from the purge of senior military officers and defense civilians. The civilian workforce has been shaken by the chaotic past few months at the Pentagon, especially in light of the indiscriminate layoffs and an impending 8% reduction of the entire workforce. And earlier this week, Secretary Hicks had issued guidance to eliminate about 20% of the general and flag officer positions in the U.S. military. I've always advocated for efficiency at the Department of Defense, but tough personnel decisions should be based on facts and analysis, not arbitrary percentages. Eliminating the positions of many of our most skilled and experienced officers without sound justification would not create efficiency in the military. It indeed could cripple it. I'd like to know how you would both plan to address these challenges. Once again, thank you to the nominees, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Reed. And now we'll start with our opening statements. Mr. Obadal, we will start with your opening statement, please.
Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, I'm honored by the opportunity to appear here today. I thank the President for his trust in my ability to return to public service by nominating me for this position. I'm grateful for the love and support of my family over our many years. My wife, Christine, is a West Point graduate and former Army officer who raised our 3 boys almost single-handedly because of my overseas commitments. Our sons, Alex, Chris, and John, were unwittingly pressed into service as Army kids, moving schools and dealing with the regular absence of their dad. Over the course of 27 years of active duty, I led soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and civilians at multiple levels. It is the greatest professional privilege that one can experience. During this time, I managed large budgets and workforces. I spent extensive time coordinating between government agencies. I led multinational efforts requiring diplomacy, collaboration, and complex negotiations. My subsequent experience in industry was critical to my understanding of the defense industrial base, the challenges of the military acquisition process, and the widening time gap between the commercial innovation cycle and the military's adoption of emerging technology. I believe the Undersecretary, as Chief Management Officer, should be focused on the business of our Army, installations, budget, acquisitions, and manpower. These areas are direct contributors to key priorities of mine if confirmed: readiness, transformation, and responsible resource management. These priorities are critical to national security because in a time of crisis, from large-scale combat operations to disaster relief, our Army is the machine to which the nation turns. It is the only arm of government to address problems at scale. It is the final backstop of organization, material, and human expertise to manage natural disasters, pandemics, civil infrastructure, and most importantly, to fight and win on the ground. To complete these tasks, the Army must rapidly evolve to meet today's challenges while simultaneously shaping capabilities against tomorrow's threats, and do so deliberately instead of in response to the actions of external forces. A transformed Army will be better equipped to defend the homeland and maintain its criticality to the joint force. If confirmed as Undersecretary, I commit to focusing on today's readiness, transformation for tomorrow, and disciplined resource management, all in order to ensure that our soldiers never have to experience a fair fight. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Obadal. Now we'll move to Mr. O'Keefe for your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairwoman Ernst, Ranking Member Reed, and members of this distinguished committee. It is an honor to sit before you today after sitting on the other side of the dais behind you over the last 8 years. I have to say you all look very intimidating from this vantage point. As President Trump's nominee to be the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, I thank the President for nominating me and Secretary Hegseth for his support. With me this morning is my wife, Lindsay. We met 14 years ago as Air Force officers stationed in England. She was a captain and I was a second lieutenant at the time. Fortunately for me, Lindsay was somehow able to see past my inferior rank, and I've been a better man for it ever since. It seems appropriate with Mother's Day coming up. She's an excellent mother. We have 3 children who are also here for now, ages 6, 5, and 2. Lindsay's continued sacrifice and support have enabled me to pursue a career in public service. When Senator McCain first hired me to join the SASC staff, I could not imagine the magnitude of the opportunity that I had been given. Senator Inhofe and then Senator Wicker graciously allowed me to remain on their staff and entrusted me with additional responsibilities. Working with these statesmen has been my great good fortune. The Senate Armed Services Committee is the epitome of what our founders intended when they drafted Article 1 of the Constitution. The American people should know and be confident that without fail and on a bipartisan basis, the leadership and members of this committee take seriously their responsibility to, as Article 1, Section 8 says, provide for the common defense of the United States. It has been the highlight of my professional life to have been able to support all of you. If confirmed, I will take the lessons I have learned on this committee to the Department of Defense. In addition to implementing swiftly the directives of the President and the Secretary of Defense in a manner consistent with the law, my priorities are, number one, elevate the stature of military service, number two, improve military and civilian defense talent management, and number three, provide the resources and staffing necessary to stabilize the military health system. I'm happy to go into more details in the Q&A if you like. In the meantime, I thank the committee for considering my nomination, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Keefe. And now we have a series of questions that we ask of our civilian nominees. So, number one, have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes, I have.
Yes.
Have you assumed any duties or taken any actions that would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No.
No.
Exercising our legislative and oversight responsibilities makes it important that this committee, its subcommittees, and other appropriate committees of Congress receive testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on a timely basis. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees of Congress, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes.
Yes.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record?
Yes.
Yes.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes.
Yes.
Will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes, they will.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And now we will start our rounds of questions. We will have 5 minutes of time for each senator. And I will start with my questions, and then we'll move to the ranking member. So thank you. Thank you. So good morning, Mr. Obadal and Mr. O'Keefe. It's good to have you in front of the committee today, and thank you for your testimony today and the willingness to continue to serve in your various capacities. I'd like to start with discussion on the Army Transformation Initiative. So the ATI was just released last week, and it outlines a bold structural and personnel reforms aimed at enhancing combat power and modernization. It rightly focuses on what matters most, which is restoring the warrior ethos, investing in lethality and agility, and ensuring our soldiers are prepared to deter conflict. I appreciate the clear prioritization of combat power, and I support your resolve in tackling inefficiencies head on. So, Mr. Obadal, can you speak to how this transformation will enhance the Army's ability to respond to the pacing threat posed by China and project power more effectively in the Indo-Pacific?
Madam Chairwoman, thank you for the time, or thank you for the opportunity to address that, and thank you for the time that you spent with me last week to discuss this and other issues. I think that the Secretary and the Chief have been fairly clear in their statements that the Army that has carried us through the last 4 decades may not have the ability to match the pacing threat with China. And so if we are to reform and transform the Army, we have to start that process now and get ahead before we have 6 months of combat that will point us to the direction that we have to go. The overall goals are to have it lighter, leaner, much more technologically savvy, and to essentially from end to end modernize, not just technology, but our processes, our equipment, our organizations, and our doctrine. So essentially, it is a fundamental transformation of the Army so that we can meet China, and not only meet China and succeed, but we can achieve overmatch.
Very good. And I do appreciate the effort to align capability investments. So you talk about technology. So we've got unmanned systems, we have counter UAS, and there's, of course, artificial intelligence-driven command and control. So, Mr. Obadal, what will encourage you or does encourage you the most about how these types of technologies will give our soldiers the edge in tomorrow's fight?
Well, there's two things, Madam Chairwoman. I believe that, number one, the Army has already started evolving its acquisition processes thanks to the authorities given to it by Congress. I believe that we need to continue to maximize those authorities before we come back for more. But the second is the generation of Americans that are joining to become soldiers and officers are far more technically savvy than many of us that joined in the 90s. And so their ability to adopt and innovate and their ability to understand the problem in front of them and how technology can assist, I think is a strong thing that we have in our back pocket.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to now turn to you, Mr. O'Keefe, and a topic that I have long prioritized is preventing sexual assault in the ranks. And while the recent report showed encouraging signs with a decline in reporting, we know there's still a lot more work that needs to be done to prevent assault and support our survivors. So, Mr. O'Keefe, how do you plan to build on the recent reforms and professionalization of the sexual assault response workforce and ensure that we continue moving towards a culture of accountability and trust?
Yes, Senator, I completely agree and appreciate your leadership on this over the years. This has been a priority for this committee. It's a priority of mine, if confirmed, to ensure that we do not backslide. To your point, some recent optimism, perhaps, from the most recent reporting on this. One report is one report, though. We need to see a sustained trend. My goal is to, if confirmed, go in, continue to keep the things that are working and look at where we can continue to improve. But I sense no desire to deprioritize this. I think all signs are that this department will take it seriously.
Okay, and most certainly I will hold you to that, Mr. O'Keefe, and look forward to working with you. Ranking Member Reed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Mr. Obadal, in the Army plan, the Transformation Initiative, they want to merge the Training and Doctrine Command, TRADOC, with the Army Futures Command. And it's sort of deja vu, because in 2018, they created the Army Futures Command mostly out of TRADOC so that they could be more effective in acquisition of new equipment, more closely moving and fast moving with the high-tech industries. Coming together, these two agencies again, how would you ensure the kind of oversight that gets the mission done, i.e. that we are not just retreating, we're actually advancing?
Ranking Member, I appreciate that question because it is generated a lot of interest. And thank you for the time
Yes,
earlier this week that we spent talking about these things. When we go back and we look at why Army Futures Command was pulled out to streamline those requirements, I think that the Army has learned quite a bit over those 8 years or 7 years that's occurred. We know that we need to, according to the statements of the Secretary, we need to streamline our commands and our organizations. When I look at a merged TRADOC and AFC, I am confident that the Army can utilize the lessons learned over the last several years and apply them. But to specifically address your question, I believe it is incumbent on the leadership of the Army to give that merged command very specific outcomes and milestones to meet and define how they are going to streamline the requirements in the interest of the soldiers and the defense industrial base.
Thank you. Mr. Obadal, you are superbly prepared to deal with the transition of the Army aviation. As you know, the Army canceled the Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft last year. They've also announced the intent to cancel the Future Tactical Uncrewed Aircraft System. And also, there are significant needs to modernize our Black Hawk fleet and our Apaches. What thoughts do you have on how the Army can best organize its aircraft fleet?
Well, Ranking Member, I appreciate it because I am, as you know, emotionally tied to the AH-64 as it was the first platform I got to fly in the Army. Incredibly capable platform. I know that by divesting of the AH-64 Deltas, the leadership of the Army has said we're going to save money. It's about twice the cost of flying an AH-64 Echo, but that does not fix the fact that as we remove those, we have to fill that capability gap. And that gap has to be with autonomous and unmanned systems to perform those same duties in support of the soldiers on the ground. So if confirmed, it's something that I would look at, obviously, with the rest of the Army leadership and advise the Secretary on where I think we should apply resources.
Thank you very much. Mr. O'Keefe, in the last 3 years, the services have been improving their recruiting aspects. In fact, in the last 18 months, there's been really measurable progress. 2024 was a year where I hope the recruiting turned around and started heading in the right direction. But it's premature to declare the victory. There are so many factors that require, that encourage or discourage a recruit from coming in. What are the few things you want to do to set the military up for success in their recruiting efforts?
Senator, yes, I believe this is going to continue to be an emphasis area. It is not going to get easier. Just as a point of information, this is the peak of high school graduation in terms of the high school population. Every year from now into the foreseeable future, the high school graduation class is going to get smaller, so it's going to get harder to recruit. The department needs to continue to apply the resources in advertising and marketing and influencing people, introducing military service. As I mentioned in my opening statement, what I mean by improving the stature of military service, there's a growing disconnect in the country between those who serve and those who don't have any experience with it. And oftentimes they have an inaccurate assessment of what military service really means. The data suggests that for the most part, people who serve their country in uniform come out much better for having done so. I think the department needs to do a better job of telling its story, of selling itself and appealing to the, as I say, the smaller cohort that is both eligible and propense to serve.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Reed. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, let me just say thank you to both of you and your families for allowing you to continue your service to our country. Mr. Obadal, the Army has exhibited outstanding leadership developing our nation's cyber war fighters and should be commended. I was at Fort Eisenhower in July last year, and I was very impressed with the Cyber Center of Excellence and Army Cyber Command. Dakota State University and Army Cyber Command have a very special relationship. DSU provides both professors and professional training for the Army's Cyber Center of Excellence on Fort Eisenhower. And the Army allows cyber operators to help teach classes and provide training at DSU. The Army has sponsored the DSU SCIF reaccreditation for the mutual benefit of both organizations and our nation. Unfortunately, the SCI reaccreditation has been delayed by bureaucratic hurdles and inertia for months, although I do believe that we are on the verge of finally completing this endeavor and getting that SCIF reaccredited. If confirmed, will you commit to expediting the reaccreditation of the DSU SCIF in Madison, South Dakota, and the accreditation of their new SCIF facility in Sioux Falls?
Senator, I thank you for the question, and thank you for the time that we spent last week talking about cyber in the Army. As I said then, I believe cyber is ubiquitous. The operations are ubiquitous, both protecting our own forces and being able to apply effects on the adversary without kinetic use of weapons. Anything that advances that capability for Army Cyber Command, I would be wholeheartedly in support of if confirmed, and I would commit to trying to understand the issue and why the SCIF accreditation for those two facilities has taken so long.
Thank you, sir. I'll take that as is you'll work with us and we'll get to the bottom of this, okay?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. O'Keefe, This committee has historically been supportive of providing special authority to the Department of Defense so that it can better manage its military and civilian cyber personnel. You've worked on much of that legislation. In your judgment, how useful are these authorities, and what more could be done to improve talent management for military and civilian cyber professionals?
Senator, this committee, as you mentioned, has taken a keen interest in making sure that the Department of Defense has the authorities necessary to appeal to this highly technical workforce, both the military and the civilian side. In my judgment, I think the Cyber Accepted Service, which is currently in place in Cybercom, is a good start. I continue to hear stories that we are losing civilians out of Cyber Command to other government agencies who have perhaps more flexible authorities. I think that's an area to take a look at. Working with the CIO and our friend Ms. Sutton, if confirmed, I think there's a good potential there to come and work with the Congress to continue to make Cyber Accepted Service more appealing and more effective. Certainly DoD is always perhaps may struggle competing with the private sector. There are certain things the private sector can do that DoD just won't be able to do. But it shouldn't be the case that DoD is losing talent to other government agencies. We should be on an even footing there. On the military side, I'm quite encouraged by the things I'm seeing out of the Army. They have a pretty robust talent management group that is, I think, taken the lead in using many of the authorities that the Congress has provided, things like accelerated promotions, different ways to more flexibly structure a career, and that's encouraging as well. On the military side, I do think there's more room to better integrate the active and the reserve components, because in cyber, that is perhaps a particularly useful approach. As the private sector tends to be where you get a lot of the innovation. So we want to make sure that the reserve components are a place where we can bring talent back into the government who have that very relevant and critical private sector experience as well.
Thank you. And look, gentlemen, I just think that your technical expertise, your capabilities, and your background are both well fitted for the positions that you have been nominated for, and look forward to supporting your nominations in the next few days or as quickly as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator King.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm impressed by the upgrade in the chairmanship of this committee overnight. That's between you and me and not Senator Wicker. Mr. Obadal, one of the most difficult things is to transform the culture and the organization of a 200-year-old organization with a lot of inertia, if you will. And talk to me about how you plan to tackle that. It's more than just changing boxes on an organizational chart. We're talking about embedded culture. How do you make a change of the level that's necessary in order to ready the Army for the next conflict?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question, because it goes to the very root of the Army, which is culture. The Army is the service that is about human beings. And the machines are there to only ensure that our human beings are as effective as possible on the battlefield. When it comes to senior and executive level leadership, I believe there's really two paths or two tracks that you have to put attention to simultaneously. One are the technical aspects of management, and that is setting the course and resource management decisions that have to be made. Setting milestones and clear objectives. And the other side is leadership. And that is a bit more difficult to define on paper. And so it takes senior leaders and subordinate leaders down to the very squad and team level to ensure that we are fostering the culture that the Secretary and the Chief set for our uniformed and civilian personnel. When it comes to changing that, I acknowledge that, as you said, it is incredibly difficult.
You want to change the culture, but not destroy the positive aspects of the culture.
Right. I think that you have to state what the values are of our Army, and those need to be not only reiterated so that soldiers understand them and civilians understand them, but leaders need to engage in their formations and have those discussions so there's something behind it.
let's move for a minute to numbers and staff. Everyone in this committee is in favor of efficiency and spending our tax dollars as efficiently as possible, with avoiding unnecessary expenditures. What bothers me about the approach that's being taken in the Pentagon and frankly in some other agencies is that it starts with a number and then works backward. In other words, 8% reduction or 15% reduction. To me, that almost guarantees a result that won't be optimal. It should start with how are we doing and where are the positions that we can consolidate or eliminate, not working toward an arbitrary number. Do you see what I'm saying? I hope that you will resist in the Army a mandate to say you've got to reduce by 8%. That's almost by definition not a rational way to approach the problem of increasing efficiency. You do that by analyzing the organization and the personnel and the jobs and the demands and the future demands. Talk to me about whether you're willing to simply say, okay, boss, if it's 8%, we're going to reduce it 8%, even though that may end up undermining the capability of the Army.
So, Senator, I believe that reduction drills or recapitalization drills, regardless of the number, are actually a healthy thing for an organization on a regular basis.
I don't disagree. It's the question of whether you start with an analysis of the organization or you start with an arbitrary number that will mandate changes that may not be optimal.
I believe that when you look at restructuring or recapitalizing, the first thing that should happen is you look at what are the requirements from the combatant commands on the service. Can we meet those combatant command requirements and do so in a timely manner? And I believe that's the foundation of what the Army should do.
I agree. I appreciate that answer. Mr. O'Keefe, I'm running out of time, but we had a tragedy in Maine several years ago with a shooting, 18 people killed. It turned out the fellow had been a trainer exposed to blast overpressure. There was a lot of work done at the time. I hope that you will commit to maintaining that work and to be sure that what was learned in those various reports that were made gets down to the troop level. So that it's not just a report on the shelf in the Pentagon, but it actually affects conduct, because this is, as you know, one of the most serious problems coming out of the Mideast wars is the effects of continuous exposure to blast overpressure.
Yes, Senator, you absolutely have my commitment. We, as you know, we did quite a lot of work on this in last year's NDAA. A lot of that legislation will take effect over the next year or so. If confirmed, I look forward to implementing that legislation and working with this committee. We're learning more and more about this area every day, it seems, and it's affecting more people than perhaps we first thought. So, absolutely, you have my commitment that this is a priority.
Well, you use the magic word, implementation. One of my mottos of life is implementation can be as important as vision. We can have a good bill coming out of here. If it's not implemented adequately, it's not going to save lives. So I accept your commitment and look forward to working with you on that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King, and I appreciate your support. Next, we have Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Good morning. Mr. Obadal, thank you for your service, first of all. You're coming from Anduril Industries, is that correct? Is that how you pronounce that?
Anduril, Senator, yes.
Yeah. One of our newer defense contractors obviously has taken a novel approach to supporting a warfighter. You know, newer companies like this have become successful partly because newer defense contracting authorities and organizations such as the RCCTO, which is headquartered in Redstone Arsenal in my state of Alabama, we're making progress. So how can the Army continue to improve our acquisition systems based on the lessons learned from the RCCTO?
Senator, thank you for the question, as this is a critical part of Army transformation. And I believe that the RCCTO really showed us that we can rapidly understand the problem, innovate solutions with industry, and then field them rapidly in a number of different ways. My experience in commercial industry, and specifically in the defense technology industry, gave me a wide exposure to a number of different companies dealing with the acquisition core. And having been on both sides of the table and having overseen acquisitions in my government service, I came to the conclusion that the Army needs to be a better customer. And we need to do that through streamlining our requirements, through predictability of requirements, and not changing them and moving the goalpost on the defense industry. With that said, we always have to have agile requirements, which requires modularity, both software and hardware. So if confirmed, when I look at the entire acquisition core, I believe the people are, we have fantastic people in our acquisition core who have given us the world's strongest Army. It is our processes that we have to fix. So if confirmed, Senator, I would work diligently on that.
Yeah. Thank you. You know, as Senator Ernst said earlier, last week the Army announced the ATI initiative, headed in a different direction in some areas. I understand that. Being an old football coach, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over. You got to change along with your adversary, and we obviously need to do that. You know, part of this change last week, canceling of multiple programs, you know, one of these contracts, the Future Tactical Uncrewed Aircraft System, was won by a small family business in Alabama, my home state, named Griffin Aerospace. On Friday, they were notified that the thousands of man-hours and millions of dollars that they had spent and invested in good faith were basically wasted. It's hard to understand that, you know, from their perspective. You know, I'd like to suggest to you that the Army restore faith with these type of businesses, because we need the smaller businesses. This is not Lockheed. This is not Boeing, who could really absorb this. This is going to devastate this country. And at the end of the day, they need more than an oops. You know, we want to change here. Do you agree with that?
Senator, I wholeheartedly agree that the Army needs to take care of small business as best it can. And I believe there are a number of different ways that we can do that, because small business, in my experience, is where most of the innovation comes from. And obviously large companies, like you mentioned, build us exquisite weapon systems, and we need them, but we have to make sure that we're cultivating a robust small and medium-sized business ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you. You know, in my state, in Huntsville, we have probably 600 to 800 small defense contractors. We can't lose them. You know, they get bought out, obviously, regularly, but we need to make sure that, you know, for future innovation, they're as important as anybody. So thank you for that. Mr. O'Keefe, my role as chairman of the Subcommittee on Personnel, we held our first hearing, as you well know, with our supervisors of our academies in 30 years, first one in 30 years. Not only are you a graduate, you were involved in that. One of the things we eliminated during that hearing is that permanent military professors at the academies require Senate confirmation, which is very understandable, while civilian tenured faculty are not, making them, as far as I can tell, the only lifetime government employees not subject to advice and consent. How do you feel about that?
Senator, it is an interesting dynamic. When the permanent professors were set up decades ago, they were the majority of the faculty was all military at the service academies. I suppose the concern anytime you're discussing whether to make more civilian positions Senate confirmed is perhaps extended vacancies. I do think that there's some room to evaluate the administrative faculty authority. You know, they have a slightly nuanced statutory scheme that applies to civilian faculty. They didn't always have tenure, for instance. So I think that is something that should be evaluated, which I think could improve the sort of the effectiveness of the workforce, of the faculty mix there, without perhaps causing some of the vacancies that I think might result with Senate confirmation. But I do think that's an area to take a look at. I know the Secretary has mentioned that that's something he wants to take a look at as well.
Thank you. And when confirmed, I have some suggestions, and as the supervisors do, about transforming, you know, our military academies to make them better. We don't want to do something just to do it, but we need to make them better and grow with the times. And so look forward to visiting with you on that and working with you.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. And next we have Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Obadal, good to see you again. Congratulations on your nomination. Certainly, I enjoyed our conversation in my office prior to today's hearing. As we were sitting in the office, the Army Transformation Initiative had just come out. We had an opportunity to talk about that some in the office, but I wanted to follow up because I know you needed more time to take a look at that. We talked, if you recall, about the Detroit Arsenal and the Ground Vehicle Systems Center, which are really the center and the heart of the Army's research and development, acquisition and supply chain issues. So I'm concerned about what this impact this could have, and I want to just reach out to you again and ask if you've had a chance to review it and what sort of impact do you think it'll have on the Detroit Arsenal and GVSC, and is it something we can certainly work on together?
Well, Senator, thank you for the time that you spent with me in your office and the discussion on this. And I think as we've seen the Secretary and the Chief testify yesterday, a number of top-line issues that now we need to get into the second level of detail on Army transformation. And this is the work over the next several months that we have to do not only internal to the Army, but with the other services, the combatant commands, and importantly with Congress to understand what are the effects on the facilities like what you mentioned, because especially in Michigan, right, as a vehicle hub for the Army,
right.
The Army is and still will be a vehicle-centric service, and so it's just a matter of what types of vehicles, what are the capabilities. And I think these are the things that over the course of the rest of this year, if confirmed, I would look forward to working with you, your office, and this committee on.
Well, I appreciate that for that commitment. If confirmed, certainly we'll want to work very closely with you. We think they provide a valuable product for the Army and want to make sure that continues and would look forward to working with you. Also, we talked about the Army shifting its focus to the Indo-Pacific, and particularly we talked about multi-domain task forces and how those are the centerpiece of the Army's efforts to in the region, allowing the joint force to operate freely within contested environments with 5 planned active duty MDTFs right now. As we discussed in my office, I believe that the National Guard could play a very important role. And I would like you, if you would, please elaborate on our discussion during our office about some of the potential benefits you see of a National Guard multi-domain task force.
Well, Senator, as we discussed, I see the multi-domain task force as an area where almost all of advanced warfighting systems are coming together in one organization: space, cyber, long-range precision fires, information operations, and others. Under one command. And I think that the Army, as it advances, it's going to continue to refine the tactics, techniques, procedures, and resources that are required by the MDTFs. And then we'll have to have that very robust discussion about how do we extend that into the reserve components because they are our strategic depth, the National Guard and Reserve. So if confirmed, I would look forward to continuing that conversation.
Great. Well, I look forward to that. Mr. O'Keefe, congratulations as well on your nomination. As you know, the National Guard not only supports domestic emergencies like natural disasters, but also the DoD's global military operations in a robust way. If confirmed, you'll be responsible for the readiness of Guard units across the country, including those in Michigan, Camp Grayling, as well as Selfridge Air National Guard Base and others. You must, in your role, you're going to have to balance the National Guard's readiness with active and reserve components. But unfortunately, despite their critical role, the National Guard is often underfunded. It's often understaffed in comparison to other components. So my question for you is, if confirmed, how will you address the persistent shortfalls in National Guard resourcing, especially given their role as an operational force for the past 2 decades, and not just strategic reserves?
Yes, Senator, I agree. I think we've, over the last 2 decades, the role of the reserve component, the National Guard in particular, has changed dramatically from the way it perhaps was set up as the Cold War ended. I don't know that the department has ever sort of seriously considered the implications of that. I do think this is a unique time where, as we're seeing transformation efforts in at least a few of the services right now, this is a time where I think the department can apply a little bit more rigor to figure out what is the proper role of the reserve component, how do we resource them, what are we going to use them for. These are sort of classic force mix questions that, if confirmed, personnel and readiness should be the lead for. They're the subject matter experts across the department on force mix allocation. And I look forward, if confirmed, to working with the Secretary and the military departments to help them as they're thinking their way through this in light of what we think are the likely requirements facing the entire force.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Senator Cotton.
Morning, gentlemen. Mr. Obadal, the Army has begun to modernize the organic industrial base, but it's still not fully using arsenal and ammunition plants. The arsenals, such as the one in Pine Bluff, are struggling for modernization funds and additional work. This underutilization is particularly damaging during a munition shortage that could impact our ability to face adversaries like China. Do you believe the Army should utilize the resources it already owns to maximize production for critical munitions?
Senator, thank you for the question and the attention to this, because I believe that our almost 24 plants, arsenals, depots are our strategic depth to be able to sustain combat and large-scale combat operations. So, yes, I share your concern for the health of the organic industrial base in the Army.
Thank you. Part of former Secretary Wormuth's solution to the recruiting crisis that she helped create was to cut 3,000 billets from Army Special Operations Forces, a decision that both the SOCOM and the PACOM commanders advised against. Last year's National Defense Authorization Act prohibits these Special Operations Forces cuts until the Army Secretary completes an additional assessment. Would you agree to taking a closer look at reversing these cuts?
Yes, Senator, I would commit to continuing that evaluation as the Army is doing that right now, I believe.
Okay. The caisson platoon at Arlington National Cemetery was out of operation for much of the Biden administration, which was astonishing to me since it's just horses pulling wagons, something human beings have been doing since the dawn of time. Secretary Driscoll and General George have done a good job of getting the caisson platoon back to limited operations. I'm very keen to see it get back to full operational capacity to make sure that our soldiers and their families promptly receive the honors they deserve at Arlington National Cemetery. Can you commit to working with the Secretary, General George, and this committee to get the caisson platoon back up to full operational capacity as soon as possible?
Yes, Senator. I believe it to be a critical part of Arlington National Cemetery, and I understand that there have already been big strides made in professionalizing this program. I would commit to continuing to monitor that and advance it.
Thank you. Mr. O'Keefe, welcome to you as well. Civil service reform is a clear priority for the administration. I think it's one that's long overdue. While the Department of Defense has many dedicated civil servants, it also has a lot of outdated bureaucratic processes and inflexible performance management systems that have too often not rewarded excellence and promoted mediocrity. In late January, the administration issued guidance for all agencies to conduct a 210-day review of which positions could be reclassified as scheduled career policy positions to give the President and the Secretary more ability to manage the civilian workforce. What are your thoughts about this review and the possible implementation and what it could help bring to the department?
Senator, I do think it's overdue to take a look at the authorities that apply to the national security and defense civilian workforce. I think this is a useful exercise. And of course, the civilians will continue to be a critical component of the DoD workforce, and they have been for many years now. If confirmed, I look forward to participating in that review. I don't know the details of that exact effort, But I do think civil service reform for national security workers is critically important. The department has a variety of authorities that the Congress has already provided that, in my judgment, are being underutilized. I mentioned cyber accepted service earlier. There are many others. Direct hire authority has been provided many times over the last decade, and yet it still takes almost 3 months to hire somebody. So I think some of these delays and challenges are somewhat self-imposed. If confirmed, I look forward to figuring out where the department is making things harder for itself than it should be. The Congress enacts these authorities for a reason, that they be used effectively. And if confirmed, that's sort of one of my goals, as I mentioned in my opening statement, is taking advantage of the many authorities that the Congress has provided, as well as implementing the directives of the president in this area.
Okay. Thank you both.
Senator Kelly.
Mr. Obadal, last week, Secretary Driscoll and General George sent a letter to the Army on the new Army Transformation Initiative to implement Secretary Hegseth's directive. This directive emphasized that the Army must prioritize investments and existing resources to improve electronic warfare capabilities, among other things. And to this point, at least I agree, we need to be doing everything we can to prepare our military for a potential next fight. And electronic warfare is a critical part of that. That's why I'm concerned that the U.S. Army Test and Evaluation Command, ATAC, may have a RIF plan that would disproportionately impact certain critical test centers and result in long-term consequences for testing and evaluation and also readiness. ATAC provides critical test and evaluation capabilities to the U.S. Army and plays a crucial role in informing Army senior leaders. Historically, ATAC has been committed to ensuring test and evaluation occurs across varied climates and unique geographies, from the Arctic Regions Test Center to the Tropic Regions Test Center and Yuma Test Center, which provides extreme weather testing in a realistic environment. In addition, the electronic proving ground at Fort Huachuca provides an invaluable asset with its interference-free environment and ability to execute developmental testing due to its very unique geography. So, Mr. Obadal, if confirmed as the Undersecretary of the Army, you will have a critical role in executing the new Army Transformation Initiative. How will you ensure the Army prepares for future advanced electronic warfare threats?
Senator, thank you for the question. And I would like to acknowledge the critical services that ATEC and the number of facilities around the country, including Huachuca and Yuma, that it maintains. I think, as we have seen now, we have the strategic direction from the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Army for the Army Transformation Initiative, and it is the coming months and couple of years of the second level of detail of how do we streamline our organizations to ensure that we are providing the best equipment to our soldiers. Testing that equipment can take place in a number of different ways. ATEC certainly is one of those, as well as testing in the transformation and contact brigades that have been, by all accounts, successful over the last couple of years. But if
can you elaborate on that? Is the Army doing developmental testing in operational units?
So, Senator, the transformation and contact essentially is bringing capabilities at a smaller scale to brigade and level, or brigade and below level organizations, and allowing soldiers to experiment with this at training centers and on maneuvers at their home bases, and then giving that feedback and that cycle right back to the innovators so they can go back and change these capabilities and give that feedback directly to the senior leadership of the Army as they make decisions on what to
typically, in my experience in the Navy, is that's sort of operational testing. You put it out there to a real unit, but something that's more further developed than a developmental test process, which what ATEC does. So do you agree that disproportionately slashing our electronic warfare test centers would harm the Army's electronic warfare capabilities?
Well, Senator, I don't have enough information to make an assessment on that. If confirmed, I would commit to pulling together the right data and the right experts and be able to advise the Secretary.
Okay, so this is my view on this. This is not an area where we can afford to make a mistake here. So if the Army does make a decision to RIF a highly specialized civilian workforce in remote locations, it's not going to be easy to reverse course on this. So if you're confirmed, I encourage you to take a very close look and consider how this would ultimately or could impact the warfighter in the kind of combat equipment they get, and to make sure that we don't, make a mistake that's kind of hard to reverse.
You have my absolute commitment to that, Senator.
All right, thank you.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville, and congratulations to the witnesses. I had a good conversation with General George and Secretary Driscoll. They called about the Army transformation initiatives, and I applaud its boldness and being quick out of the blocks, looking at the details. I will tell both of you two sort of just cautions or questions I raised in that phone conversation. The first was some of the discussions about reduction of personnel kind of at the top rank, headquarters reduction, I think probably need to be done. But I just warned them in this committee a number of years ago. Mr. O'Keefe, you probably remember, reduction in headquarters staff was sort of a driving theme of one year's NDAA. And at the time, I warned against sort of across-the-board reductions and argued that they should be done based on performance and priorities. The mandate to reduce headquarters staff went ahead. A few years later, we had a huge crisis in military housing. And what we realized is that that directive to reduce headquarters staff had been implemented by reducing massive swaths of people at the Pentagon who were working on military housing. And so while not lifting blame off the shoulders of the providers of housing, it really was a program that wasn't being managed well in the Pentagon because we let people go who were responsible for it. So I do think reductions are often important. I had to do a lot of them when I was governor. Just it should be based on priorities and performance rather than trying to hit some across-the-board number. I sort of echo what my colleague Senator King said. The second thing I asked, and questions have been asked about this already, about the proposed remerger of Army Futures and TRADOC. As Senator Reed mentioned, TRADOC was established, I think, in 1972, and it oversees 32 schools that train 750,000 members of the Army. Army Futures was pulled out of it about 6 years ago. And Mr. Obadal, I credit what you said, that hopefully lessons have been learned in that time period to streamline the way we do things so that when it's reassembled, those lessons carry forward. There's been some discussion about when it is reassembled, will TRADOC, the 50-year-old organization, be put under the 6-year-old organization or vice versa, or is that not even the way to look at it? Are they just being merged? I was assured by General George and Secretary Driscoll that there was not going to be any significant change in employment levels at Fort Eustis. I'm obviously going to be following that closely, but I do hope you're right, and I suspect that you'll be really working to focus on this, that those lessons learned during the 6 or 7 years that Army Futures stood alone can be reinserted back in the merged organization in ways that help it be effective. So those are the observations that I made to General George and Secretary Driscoll. Again, I see much to like in the broader initiative, and I would make those same observations to you. Some questions, one for each of you. Mr. Obadal, the committee's been really focused upon understanding drone incursions that occurred at Langley Eustis in December 2023, and then also in New York and New Jersey at the end of last year. The challenge as a whole of government, not just military, but civilian, FAA, et cetera, but the Army is DoD's executive agent for countering small UAS, and it's charged with leading and directing the relevant doctrine, requirements, material and training standards, and also the capabilities to establish joint solutions for addressing current and future small UAS threats. Should you be confirmed, how will you ensure coordination between the services in developing a joint counter small UAS doctrine to help us solve this growing threat?
Well, Senator, thank you. It's an important and topical issue, as we've seen growing over the years. In my mind, as the executive agent, the Army has to consider really two different buckets. One is the technical aspects of how do you layer technical protection and also effectors, which are more complicated in the United States than they are overseas because they have to be less kinetic and more electronic, but also the layers of authorities. And so whether that's state, local, FAA, and Department of Defense, and then of course Department of Justice comes in with enforcement of these things. So those are very difficult tasks. If confirmed, there are things that I would look at from that aspect is how do we layer not only our capabilities, but then how do we effectively layer our authorities. The other problem that I think has been addressed is there is no single end-to-end authority in the Army for this, and that imparts risk.
Thank you. And Mr. O'Keefe, congratulations. You and I had a good visit in my office. I'm going to ask you a question for the record about one of your three stated priorities that we discussed in my office, which is working on sort of TRICARE, customer satisfaction, the Defense Health Agency, and especially the problem in getting providers compensated in a timely way. Because if you don't do that, you end up with providers who would like to serve military members and families, but then they choose not to because they can't be compensated. We've had a lot of complaints about that. You and I had a good discussion about it in the office. I'll ask a question about that for the record, but appreciate your service and congratulations to both of you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Congratulations to both of you. Mr. O'Keefe, I led the passage of a measure called the Xavier-Sander Act, which is named in honor of a young sailor from Connecticut who took his own life while serving on the USS George Washington. His ship was in maintenance. He was enduring unacceptably poor living conditions while the ship was in for repair. Too many junior enlisted service members have been forced to live aboard vessels while they're under repair without air conditioning, without meals, without rest, effectively, and with limited access to amenities and mental health support. So the Navy now has expanded authorities to provide sailors with a basic allowance for housing as a result of this act. They can live in commercial housing. They have increased access to mental health support. No service member should suffer as Xavier did. I'm still in touch with his father and his family and other service members. I'd like your commitment that you will fully support implementation of the Xavier-Sanders Act.
Yes, Senator, absolutely. And it was a privilege to work on that legislation with you. I do think it's a great case study. I know your office worked with the Navy and in working with that too. It's a great case study in where the Congress and the Department of Defense and the services, when working together on a problem, can really come up with some very effective solutions. So thank you for working on that.
Thank you. And I'd like a commitment, if you're confirmed, that you will send me a report on the usage of these authorities, say, by the end of the year.
Absolutely. Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Obadal, I know you've served in the Army for 30 years and then left for the private sector. The company where you are now, Anduril Industries, is a major defense firm with millions of dollars of contracts with the DoD. Will you commit to sell the stock that you own in that company?
Well, Senator, I appreciate the opportunity to address that. I believe in two things, I think, that I share with members of this committee, and that's transparency and very strong ethical guidelines. And as with every potential senior government official, I've gone through an exhaustive process with the Office of Government Ethics, and they have done a thorough review and presented me with the guidelines. I will abide by all of those guidelines, and as I always have, I will abide by the law.
That a yes or a no?
Well, Senator, my restrictions and my recusals are laid out in my agreement with the OGE.
My understanding is that you're not selling the stock. Is that correct?
So that is detailed in my agreement that I will retain that.
If you're not selling the stock, doesn't that create an appearance of conflict of interest?
Well, Senator, under Section 1117 of the 22 NDAA, I am recused writ large from anything having to do personally and substantially with my former employer.
Well, I'm not asking you whether you're recused. I'm asking you about the appearance of continuing to own stock in a company that has major contracts with the DoD, where you're in charge of essentially administering the Army, and the interests of that company could be affected, whether or not you're recused from the specific approval of the contract. It still is an appearance of conflict of interest. I'm not going to debate with you, but, you know, in this administration, it may seem minor as a conflict of interest, given that the President of the United States is selling crypto and inviting people to the White House who buy his meme coin and making hundreds of millions of dollars from transactions in that coin. I think he has lowered the bar irretrievably, but it still is really regrettable. Let me go on to another topic. I understand that there may be a parade on June 14th to celebrate the President's birthday. Do you support that use of 30, 50, perhaps $60 million for a parade to celebrate the President's birthday?
Well, Senator, I can only comment on what I've seen. I do not understand. I don't know the costs of a parade. What I do know is that the Army is celebrating its 250th birthday on June 14th with a parade that will showcase soldiers and provide a level
what
of
amount
access.
of expenditure would be appropriate in your view?
Well, Senator, I can't comment on that because I'm not in the department, and I can't make an assessment on the effects and
Let
the
me ask you
access that the public
hypothetically, wouldn't it be a better use of Army funds for training, for care of the troops, for housing, not to mention thousands of veterans who have been fired from the VA, supposedly to save money? Wouldn't those be better uses of that money?
Well, Senator, I'm not going to engage in the hypothetical. What I will say is that the military, the DoD writ large, does a number of things like this to increase awareness and to use as a recruiting and appreciation tool for the citizens of the United States.
I'm
So
not
air
against
shows and
celebrating
parades.
the Army's birthday. What I would ask you to oppose is the use of anywhere from $40 to $50 million, as has been publicly reported. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Next, we have Senator Slotkin.
Thank you for being here. Couple of questions, Mr. Obadal, similar vein. So, you know, we understand you're from Anduril, and no one quibbles with that. It's a company that does a lot of good work with the Defense Department. But if I'm hearing correctly, you are not going to divest from all of your stock. And I know you've got a deal, but you know, the average soldier, as you know, would have to be open about what stock they have, what conflicts of interest they may have if they were a contracting officer. So you're keeping some of your Anduril stock and selling others. Is that correct?
Well, Senator, it's not stock. The Anduril is not a public company. It's equity.
Equity.
And so I will always act in adherence with my agreement with the Office of Government Ethics as they've laid out the guidelines, and I will always act in accordance with the law.
And will that agreement be made public so we can understand? Because it's true, you have a perception problem, right? This administration looks around every corner like it's milking the cow of America with conflicts of interest, doing things we've never seen before, right? Charging to get into the White House, setting up, as we heard, cryptocurrency that the President of the United States and his family are backing. We already have reports of people buying that cryptocurrency so they can get some relief on tariffs. The perception problem is real. So we don't want you to have that perception problem. You're leading an incredibly, or potentially leading an incredibly important institution in our country. Will you commit to making that deal public, at least to this committee?
Without a doubt, Senator,
Great.
I welcome the transparency.
Great. That would be great. Just, I think, and then I understand I mean, the concern is just this past week, the Army announced its transformation initiative, and a huge amount of that is geared towards drones and other things that, Andrew, your former company or your current company is neck deep in. And again, I don't have an inherent problem with the transformation. I just have a problem with the idea, the perception to our troops that their leaders can do things that they themselves cannot, that their leaders might be able to do, enrich themselves or get away with security clearance violations that they themselves cannot. And as a former CIA officer, and you yourself as a former soldier, you know that sense of injustice when you're at the bottom of the food chain and you see bosses doing something differently. So I'm glad you're willing to make it public, but given the amount of transformation that will potentially enrich a place like Andorra, what else are you going to do, again, to hive yourself off so that there's not even a whiff that you are making transformation decisions about the Army to enrich yourself and others you work with?
Well, Senator, I appreciate the opportunity to address it in more in depth, but it comes down to, if confirmed, one of the first things to do is work through with the Office of General Counsel the implementation guidance of any recusal, the same that all senior government officials do, and then make sure that daily I am adhering to that and doing regular reviews with OGC.
So I think it would help us greatly in our working relationship if you just provided that again to the committee so that we understand, so that when we're asked, we can say, yes, there's a major transformation going on in the Army. That's going to be difficult for a lot of us, a lot of our home states. But if you want us to be bought in, as I know your leadership does, because they called us this week, then please make sure we understand that there's not a milking of the cow going on for folks at the top of the Army. Mr. O'Keefe, I asked your potential future boss, Mr. Tata, this past week about access to the data of every single soldier, airman, Marine in the entire force, right? You are the holder of everyone's personal information, their health information, everything on their spouses, everything on where they live, basing information. Pete Hegseth has said he welcomes DOGE in. DOGE has already shown that they cannot properly handle that data. There's been an agency, the NLRB, where they got access to the data. The Chinese just followed them and went after it within like hours. I'm not saying it's intentional, but the idea of the sensitivity of this data personally and as a national security issue. Mr. Tata said that he would, quote, sign a contract with DOGE. Do you commit to providing that contract on the sensitive control of data to this committee?
Senator, absolutely. Whatever agreements or the structure of the sort of access to any sort of critical information, happy to work with the committee and your office to make sure that you have confidence in the department's ability to safeguard. As you mentioned, this is critical, very sensitive information, health records, addresses. The department knows more about its workforce than perhaps any other federal agency, for good reason. But that comes with a lot of trust. And if confirmed, you have my commitment that that trust is well placed.
Great. We'll look forward to that contract with DOGE. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Slotkin. And just for the committee's awareness, the committee has received all of Mr. Obadal's information. We have that, and it is also all publicly available on the government website. There is a government ethics website. We all have access to that information. So Mr. Obadal has been completely transparent and has been adhering to the rules of this committee. Next, we have Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to thank you both for very productive conversations you had with me prior to this hearing. Mr. Obadal, given this week's announcements on Army transformation, I want to start with you first. We had a great conversation. It's no secret that I am deeply committed to our Army and its future. I support Army modernization, but we must balance modernization with readiness today. To be clear, I'm encouraged by parts of the Army's proposed reforms. However, I am concerned about the impacts of some proposed cuts to the Joint Forces Sustainment and Supply Enterprise, and we discussed this a little bit. For one, I worry how the proposed integration of Joint Munitions Command and Army Sustainment Command may impact their two critical mission sets. including managing complex ecosystems required to deliver munitions to warfighters, both for the Army but also for the Joint Force. And then also, as the Army considers replacing the Humvee, I urge the Army to consider impacts to medical evacuation capabilities, because the Humvee is really the main source of the Army's ambulances platforms. Mr. Obadal, will you commit to engaging with me and this committee early, before final decisions are made, so that we can fully communicate and help the Army address the far-reaching impacts of cuts like these?
Absolutely, Senator, and thank you for the time that you spent with me on the phone.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you. Mr. O'Keefe, turning to you, if confirmed, you will be a key advisor to Secretary Hegseth on the review he directed to ensure physical standards among the services are sex neutral, his words. As you know, every service member does take a physical fitness test at least annually. It's required for your continued service and your promotion. I took one every year for 23 years, and some years more than once. On top of that, specific combat military occupational specialties, like Army Rangers, for example, already have added physical standards. The services have combat job-specific physical testing, which is actually what makes our forces capable of carrying out the full range of types of combat roles. Do you acknowledge that the military already has uniform physical standards specific to different occupational specialties that is the same for both male and female troops?
Senator, I don't know the details of every physical fitness requirement for every occupational specialty. I have been informed that many of them do at least. So okay. I don't know every job.
Understood.
Yeah.
But the combat roles, especially the Rangers, SEALs, those all have one standard that are not gender differentiated.
Again, I don't know the details of every position in those units. I do believe that many of them do.
Okay. Not all combat roles are the same. The physical and mental requirements to operate an attack helicopter, like Mr. Obadal did, which makes Black Hawk pilots like myself shudder, are different than the strength needed to lift a mortar tube, or different than the endurance required of a scout sniper, for example. The fact of the matter is that the services already test to the most applicable physical requirements for a specific combat role. For example, the Marines have military occupational specialty specific physical standards, which are mission specific, and both men and women have to meet the same standard, and the Army also has sex neutral standards for every occupational specialty. If combat jobs already have gender neutral physical qualifications, what change is Secretary Hegseth actually making? He has his sights on creating and again, his words, a gender neutral combat standard for the annual fitness assessments. These are tests that were ensured to make sure that we have a baseline physical fitness across the United States military. They're not job specific, they're just making sure that you can stay in the military, and those are differentiated based on gender and age. But if Secretary Hegseth's logic is to have one combat fitness standard to rule them all, why would we stop at gender? Mr. O'Keefe, would you support holding all service members in combat roles, regardless of age, to the same fitness standards if you're going to get rid of the gender-specific standards?
Senator, I think that the fitness requirements for combat roles should be, whether it's the fitness test, and I appreciate the distinction between a fitness test and the occupational requirements. I think that's important to note. But certainly the occupational standards, I believe, should be consistent, regardless of who's performing the job.
Okay, so would you agree with me that if we are going to get rid of the gender differentiation, we should also get rid of the age differentiation? Because it's supposed to be for the job.
Senator, as I say, I think any requirement for a particular job should be agnostic about, as long as the requirements are set in a realistic way and are determined to be relevant for the position, it's my view that those should be consistent.
So both gender and age neutral?
Anyone performing the role, yes, Senator.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that Secretary Hegseth should eliminate age-based scaling for annual fitness test scoring and standards then, if he's going to get rid of the gender scaling. Would you agree with that?
Again, Senator, I think there's and you noted the distinction between the fitness tests and the occupational requirements. I think that those are different conversations. They've been muddied somewhat over the years, I grant you. But I do think there's a distinction there between the two.
Well, he's bringing it up. He wants to get rid of the gender differentiation for the annual fitness test. If he's going to do that, would you agree with me that he should that we should also then get rid of the age differentiation for the annual fitness test. If you're going to get rid of the gender differentiation, then you should get rid of the age differentiation.
Certainly, Senator, I've confirmed. I don't know the details of I know there's an effort in the department going through all of that right now, and we just had a meeting with the Army about a week ago on their test. But certainly, have confirmed that would be, I think, an area where I'd look forward to providing some insight and advice to the Secretary on that one.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentlemen, congratulations on your nomination. Thanks for your service, you and your families, so really appreciate it. Very important that we have people with your caliber and qualifications to do this. I'd like, first of all, for you two to commit to coming to Alaska with me, seeing our great Army, the 11th Airborne Division, maybe better than the 82nd Airborne Division already. A little competition there. And to see what General Billy Mitchell called the most strategic place in the world. Have either of you been to Alaska, and will you commit to coming to Alaska with me to see our fine military forces there?
Senator, my mother-in-law was a public school teacher in Anchorage for 25 years.
Excellent.
She
Great.
said that I can only go if it's cold, during the
Good.
cold months.
Okay, well, I like that answer. Good. Thank
Senator,
you to your mother-in-law, by the way.
I visited Alaska years ago as a tourist, but I agree with my friend here. I'd like to go up in the winter. That's the time to go. So I'd like to go see it then.
Great, good. Well, we will do that in the winter. I'll take you to Eielson and Fort Wainwright, Fort Greely. It'll be 30, 40, 50 below zero, where our tough Arctic warriors train in that kind of temperature. On an issue that actually has been a real troubling one in Alaska, we have these great military members. Our Army does such a great job. You know, the 11th Airborne has now stood up in Alaska. 49th Missile Defense Battalion at Fort Greely. That's an Alaska National Guard unit. They literally protect the entire country. They have this great motto, the 300, protecting the 300 million. That's where all the ground-based missile interceptors that shoot down any incoming missiles that would hit Washington, D.C., New York City, Miami, it's all based in Alaska. That's Army as well. A lot of people don't know that. But we do have we've had over the last several years a very high rate of suicide among our active duty forces in Alaska, particularly the Army. Can I get your commitment, gentlemen, even before you get up to Alaska, to continue to work? I think the Army's done a good job. I think the top leadership at OSD has done a good job. But this is a tough issue, and it's it's kind of hard to get our arms around. But of course, it's heartbreaking. Can I get your commitment to work with me in this committee on this issue to keep the rates are starting to come down, but they were super duper high with regard to the active duty component of the Army in Alaska, and we need to keep the trend going down. Can I get your commitment to work with me on that?
Absolutely, Senator. It's suicide, something that I think many of us in uniform have had firsthand experience with, and I think that the Army and the DoD writ large has done a great job with understanding mental health is health care.
Yeah.
The effects and the treatment of PTSD, and then the mitigation of TBI.
Good. Mr. O'Keefe?
Absolutely, Senator, and I would compliment I've worked on legislation on your behalf in this area. I know that this is a focus, and I would compliment the Army. I agree with you. I think they've taken this very seriously and have reacted appropriately. I would highlight, I think one of perhaps the best things the Army did is they started asking people who wanted to go to Alaska to volunteer, as opposed to just sending people who had no idea what they were in for. And that's been a very effective thing, I think.
Yeah, you're making a really good point. The 11th Airborne, they rebranded that. That's an airborne unit. Like I said, it's always good to have competition, right? 82nd Airborne maybe was getting a little too, they just didn't have enough competition. Now you got the Arctic Angels, right? Great storied history, by the way. A lot of people don't know the 11th Airborne's history in World War II. Very impressive. But I think you're right. You give a unit, a mission, high morale. It's starting, but we got to get to the number. We still have numbers that we don't like, that we don't want in terms of suicide there. let me ask one final question. I just want both of your views on recruiting, right? We went through this really bad recruiting crisis, particularly for the Army during the Biden years. Look, I have a whole host of reasons I think that happened. The Biden era Army leadership, DoD leadership took their eye off the ball in terms of what it means to recruit young men and women who want to go fight and deploy and serve their country. They kind of turned it into this social thing, ridiculous ads for recruiting. I won't mention them here. Give me your view very quickly on why you think it's already started to turn around under the Trump administration, but what we need to do to make sure we don't have that kind of crisis that the Army had 2 or 3 years ago. We were off by like tens of thousands of recruits. And for an all-volunteer force, that's existential if you can't get young Americans to join our military. What do you think happened, and can you commit to me to continue to work on the positive trend we've already seen during the Trump administration?
Well, Senator, I'll be happy to elaborate on the record, but what I believe are our Army senior leaders, and this is specific to the Army, have to be the ones that go out and engage with local and state civic leaders, and that will make sure that our recruiters are a part of the landscape and have the access that they need to those high population areas. And I think that they can then describe the opportunities and instill a sense of pride and ownership in civil service and in military service.
Good. Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, Senator, very quickly, I think the best thing that the Army has done is they've started to imitate the Marine Corps model on recruiting. They're sending
That's never, by the way, in this committee, that's never a bad answer.
They're sending some of their sharpest officers.
Right, Senator Reed? I'm sorry.
I think you're way over time.
I'm not. Continue, Mr. O'Keefe. That's the best damn answer I've heard in this committee in a long time.
It matters where you send your sharpest people, and the Marine Corps has been sending some of their sharpest officers and NCOs to recruiting for a long time, and it shows in the numbers.
Great, good answer. Thank you, Madam Chair. That was outstanding.
Enough of that, Colonel Sullivan. Okay, thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you both for your dedication and service. I'm very grateful that you're taking on these jobs at this time. I want to continue the recruiting conversation that Senator Sullivan started, Mr. O'Keefe. So this committee has for a long time tried to enhance getting the best and brightest that we possibly can in certain mission areas where we fall short. One of those mission areas has been cyber. And I don't have to recite for you the litany of cyber attacks on this country over the last 5 years that are devastating and ones that could easily undermine our military readiness to the point that we can't fight a war or respond effectively. So, one of the goals of this committee is to create a cyber academy where we can create a ROTC type program at over 600 schools and universities across the country, from community colleges to elite universities. And that program has been up and running now for a couple of years, and it's working. We are getting recruits from all across the country, and these are for non-military jobs, because obviously in the DoD, there's a great deal of non-military civilian jobs who do cyber specifically. A cyber personnel behind a computer screen, it doesn't necessarily have to be trained like a Marine to be lethal outside of their lethality on a keyboard, which is why we want to be able to recruit beyond any personnel who would want to come and serve as an Army officer or a Marine officer or any enlisted personnel. So the DOGE cuts are undermining this entire ecosystem. And so the reports we've heard is that these kids are waiting to get jobs. They actually have done the work we've asked them to do. They've done 4 years or 2 years of training specifically on the mission set that the DoD has given them for cyber, and they are waiting to be employed. And so the data is terrible. We created this program to get more recruits, to enhance our readiness, and DOGE cuts are impacting. Right now, winter graduates have not been able to obtain jobs, and internships were limited to just 25% of eligible students. Again, we're going backwards. In a mission set we have been desperate to meet. So, Mr. O'Keefe, can you commit to me that you will work to strengthen the Cyber Academy, that we will work to get the full complement of 1,000 students enrolled every year, and that we'll continue to work on campuses across the country to increase the number of schools that have the curriculum we need, and eventually to create a bricks and mortar academy so we have the cyber personnel we actually need.
Senator, yes, I think this is you've hit on a number of really important topics. One is military and civilians need to work together in this area. Not everyone, to your point, needs to be military, and the Department of Defense needs to be a better employer of civilians in this area. There's a number of authorities there, but yes, I think this is a very useful focus for the department, not just for cybercom, but across the board.
Mr. Obadal, thank you so much for your decades of service, and thank you for being committed to this new mission. Now, I want to talk about the drone incursions we've seen over our military bases. I know you have expertise in this area, and I would like you to talk about it because the publicly available reports about the drone incursion over Langley is shocking, concerning, and we can further this conversation in a skiff. But in this open session, what are you going to do to fight for the authorizations, for the technology investments, for the ability that when we have drone incursions over highly sensitive military bases that arguably are spying on us with no recourse from unknown origins, could be any adversarial nation, what do you propose to the Department of Defense, to the Secretary of Defense, to this committee about enhancing authorities so we can take them down over military bases and have the authority to do so, that we can run missions if necessary to follow drone incursions to their source to see if they're being launched from ships nearby, seeing if they're been launched from fields nearby owned by adversarial nations. What is your plan?
Well, Senator, thank you for your attention to it. It is a critical problem, as we've seen growing over the years. And to me, from a strategic standpoint, I see this as defense of the homeland. And so there are a number of, well, I really put this in two buckets. One is technical layering of capabilities, which would be different in a place like Syria or Iraq than would be in New York over a base because of the ability to use kinetics or electronic means to affect incursions by drones. But the other is the layering of authorities. And this is where I think it gets really complicated. The technical part, I am confident in the Army's acquisition capabilities and industry to be able to bring together solutions. The more difficult part is weaving together the number of authorities, and you mentioned this, right, because it goes to local and state authorities, Department of Defense, Department of Justice is involved, and Department of Homeland Defense in certain areas. This is probably the area that I would, if confirmed, that I would focus on the most is, as far as the acquisition community, let them work with industry to figure out what the right solutions are. But we have to turn the attention of Army leadership to across the interagency and down into our local governments to ensure that we're layering all of those authorities to their maximum effect.
Thank you. And I have a bipartisan bill with Senator Cotton that I would like you to review and give us comments on. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Gillibrand, and thank you for your leadership on the cyber issues, Cyber Academy and everything. She has been the leader on this committee on that, and it's really important to follow through on the issues she raised. I want to thank the nominees here for their testimony. I think it's very apparent both are extremely qualified, and I hope we can have a strong bipartisan vote for both of them getting out of the committee and onto the Senate floor here soon. For the information of members, questions for the record will be due to the committee within one business day of the conclusion of this hearing. We are adjourned.